A lost pit bull finds himself in a shelter when he recognizes the man standing in front of him and starts to cry. Just watch what happens next. Josh hoped he was making the right decision. His home felt so empty without Max, and even though he missed the loyal pit bull every day, he felt like the time was right to give another deserving dog a loving home. No one could ever replace Max, but he was determined not to feel so sad and lonely anymore. The thought of all the dogs waiting in shelters for new homes always made his heart ache. Hopefully, a new dog could help him move on from the fact that he'd never really known what happened to Max. At the shelter, Josh walked by all the kennels, looking at the dogs. Most of them ran excitedly up to the bars to greet him, as though they were desperate to make a good impression. The man wished he could take them all home. Suddenly, he arrived at a kennel that he thought was empty at first, but when he looked closely, he could see a dog curled up in the corner. The shelter staff explained that this particular dog had had a hard time settling in. Josh was struck by how similar in color the dog was to Max. The dog suddenly seemed to sense that someone was looking at him. He stood up and faced Josh, and as soon as the pair locked eyes, the pit bull in the kennel started to cry as he lifted a paw toward the man. There was no doubt that the sad dog recognized the man standing in front of him. Josh was in shock. Josh had always been a dog lover, having grown up with them since he was born, but his bond with Max, his loyal pit bull, was unlike any other. Max was the first dog Josh got on his own, and he had been by Josh's side, through thick and thin, a constant source of love and companionship. The pair did everything together and were rarely apart. However, a year ago, Max had vanished without a trace. One minute, he was in the backyard playing, and the next, he was gone. Josh searched tirelessly, putting up flyers, contacting shelters, and posting on social media, but there was no sign of Max. What made it worse was that it was entirely Josh's fault, and he blamed himself for the incident every single day since. At the bottom of Josh's backyard, there was a loose fence panel. He'd been meaning to fix it for months, but Max was always so well-behaved that he'd never tried to escape or run away, even when he was a puppy. So fixing the fence slipped to the bottom of the man's to-do list as he got ever busier with work. Soon he'd completely forgotten about it and would let Max out into the yard to run around and play with no concerns. The energetic pit bull would play for a while and then usually find a spot to have a nap. It never once crossed Josh's mind that one day he would escape. But one day, when Max was running around in the yard, he bumped into the fence and saw it wobble. He poked his head out and saw the street they lived on and another pit bull being walked on the opposite side. The curious dog pushed his way through the fence and set out on what he thought was a new adventure. Max followed the other pit bull for a while, but was shooed away by its owner. So he went in a different direction and started to explore the neighborhood. He soon got bored, though. The streets were quiet, and there was no one to play with. But Max had wandered a lot farther than he thought and now couldn't find his way home. That evening, the poor dog spent the night in an alleyway, feeling scared and confused, having no idea that his worried owner was searching everywhere for him. It had taken Josh a while to realize that Max was missing. He was used to the dog spending a lot of time outside and figured he was just sleeping when everything went quiet. When he finally went to call the dog in, he immediately panicked when he couldn't find him anywhere. Josh roamed the streets, calling for Max for hours on end, but had no luck. It was obvious he'd escaped through the fence, and the man felt angry at himself for letting it happen. He had no idea what had suddenly made Max do that, but he should have fixed the fence months ago. He'd now lost his best friend. Josh wasn't ready to give up on Max, though. He pinned missing posters up all over the neighborhood and contacted all the local shelters almost daily. When he wasn't at work, he was out looking for his loyal companion. No matter what he did, though, there was no sign of Max. As time went by, the posters faded and ripped, and the shelters, knowing who he was now, gave him the same answer each time he called. They had no dogs matching Max's description. In time, the phone calls stopped, and Josh's searches around the neighborhood slowed down. The dog could be anywhere by now. It had been months since he disappeared, and it was a guilt Josh would have to live with. The dog's disappearance left a huge void in Josh's heart. There wasn't a day that went by when he didn't think of his friend, wondering if he was safe, warm, and well-fed. The fact that he would never know what had happened to him played on his mind a lot. The sad reality was that Max was facing a tough time on the streets. The once well-groomed and playful pit bull found himself scavenging for food, navigating dangerous territories, and braving the elements. It was a completely different life from the happy one he'd once had with Josh. Despite the hardships, the loving dog never lost hope. He roamed the city, trying to find his way back home, but always ended up farther away. Max had had the best life with Josh. The man had rarely gone anywhere without him. The pair spent every second together that they could. Now, the poor dog spent all his time feeling lonely and scared. He'd encountered a few other street dogs fighting for survival, but he didn't have it in him to fight them for food or a dry spot to sleep, so the poor dog often found himself starving and sleeping out in the cold or the rain. Each night, he would shake with fear at the sound of other dogs and the nearby traffic. When the sun rose, he would wander the streets, looking for any tiny scrap of food and trying to work out if anything seemed familiar, if he could possibly find his way back to his best friend. One day, after almost a year on the streets, Max was finally picked up by animal control and taken to a shelter. He'd given up on trying to find his way home, and he'd eventually found a quiet spot to call his own. But a kind old man had noticed the poor dog hanging around more and had started to leave bits of food out for him before he realized that the kindest thing he could do was to phone the shelter. The poor pit bull was thin, his coat was matted, and his eyes, once filled with joy, now showed the struggles he'd endured. He was nothing like the dog he'd been when he lived with Josh. The shelter staff took care of him, providing warmth, food, and medical attention. They gave him the name Spot, and he gradually began to regain his strength. Despite the fact that he was now safer and better cared for than he'd been on the streets, there was still a sadness in Max, a longing for the person he'd lost. The shelter staff were used to getting dogs that took a long time to adjust to life in a kennel when they'd been roaming the streets, but everyone remarked on how downbeat the poor pit bull seemed to be. Most of the dogs in the shelter, after a few weeks, started to trust the staff, were happy to see people, and whenever visitors came looking to adopt a dog, they'd bark and wag their tails, living in hope of getting a new home. But Max never once behaved like that. Every time someone passed his kennel, he would remain hidden in a corner with no sign of happiness and excitement. No one wanted to adopt a dog like that, and the shelter staff began to worry that the sad pit bull would never find a new home. What had happened to make the dog so sad? His calm nature toward the staff told them that he'd probably once had an owner, but how had he ended up living on the streets? Max soon became a firm favorite among the shelter staff. While the other dogs were often boisterous and overexcited, Max just preferred quiet cuddles, and all the staff were happy to oblige. They were falling in love with the poor pit bull, and they just hoped that someone would be able to look past his timid nature to see what a loving dog he was. Meanwhile, Josh had endured a year of mourning and missing Max. He'd come to slowly accept that after so long, he wouldn't ever see his best friend again. The man would never forget his loyal companion, but he decided it was time to open his heart to another dog in need. He felt ready to offer a loving home again and hoped to honor Max's memory by rescuing a dog from a shelter. On a sunny Saturday, he made his way to the local animal shelter, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Was he doing the right thing? The new dog could never replace Max, but he missed having a dog. The house had been so quiet, and he missed the long walks and fun playtimes out in the yard. He'd already fixed the fence well before he'd made the decision to look for a new dog. There was no way he would put himself through that heartache again and risk another dog's life. Stepping inside the shelter, he couldn't believe the mix of emotions he was feeling. He told the staff he was open to adopting any dog and that he was sure he'd know the right one when he saw them. They allowed him to walk through the row of kennels, greeting the dogs and giving him time to find the right one. Josh was overwhelmed, though. All the dogs seemed eager to greet him, and it somehow made him feel even worse, thinking about how they all desperately wanted a new home. As he walked, he stopped at one enclosure that was strikingly different from the rest. The dog inside wasn't furiously wagging its tail, barking, or jumping up. It was just lying in a corner with its back turned to everyone. Josh was immediately taken aback by how much it looked like Max, though his heart skipped a beat as he approached the kennel. The dog now lifted his head, and finally their eyes met. Josh's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? Max, now called Spot, stared at the man in front of him. His tail started to wag tentatively, then faster. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and he let out a small, hopeful whine. Tears welled up in Josh's eyes as he knelt down, calling softly, "Max, is it really you, buddy?" Upon hearing his old name, the dog's cries grew louder, and the man could feel the lump in his throat getting bigger. The pit bull stood up on wobbly legs and moved closer to the bars of the kennel. As soon as Josh's hand touched his fur, Max began to cry, a heart-wrenching, joyous sound that echoed through the shelter. Josh was crying too, overwhelmed with emotion. The pit bull lifted his leg and placed a paw in Josh's hand, just like he used to do. "It's you, Max. I can't believe it. I found you," Josh cried out. When they realized what was happening, the shelter staff quickly unlocked the kennel, and Max practically leaped into Josh's arms, licking his face and wagging his tail so hard his whole body shook. The reunion was filled with pure joy and brought tears to the eyes of the shelter staff who had now gathered to watch after hearing the remarkable tale. Josh held Max close, whispering promises of never letting him go again. All the staff had wanted for the poor pit bull was for someone to recognize his loving qualities. They never realized that the poor dog had been clinging to hope of finding his best friend again. As Josh told them all about the last year and how he'd searched tirelessly for his companion, there wasn't a single person in the room who wasn't moved by the happy ending the pair had now got. But Josh had never imagined being reunited with Max, and now a different set of emotions was taking over. After the overwhelming reunion with Max, Josh couldn't shake off a lingering feeling of guilt. He had originally come to the shelter to give another dog a new life, and now, with Max back in his arms, he felt the need to fulfill that promise. After hearing the state that Max had arrived at the shelter inn, he felt even more determined to give another dog a new start in life. Knowing that a lot of these dogs had gone through something similar, if not worse, than what Max had was enough to bring tears to his eyes. He asked the shelter staff if they had any other pit bulls he could look at, and they pointed him in the direction of a handsome male with a gentle demeanor, patiently waiting for his forever home. As soon as Josh and Max stopped at the pit bull's shelter, the man knew they were all meant to be together. The dog immediately let Josh fuss him, and when he was introduced to Max, the pair began to play together immediately. When they had played for a little while, Max went to sit next to Josh and looked up at him as if he was giving a seal of approval. Without hesitation, Josh decided to adopt the other pit bull as well. The new dog was given the name Bruno, and he fit right in at his new home. The two dogs quickly became inseparable playmates, and the pair loved snuggling next to Josh on the sofa in the evening. The sight of Max and Bruno playing together in the backyard, with the tales and trauma of their time on the streets slowly fading away, filled Josh with a sense of joy that he'd never felt before. Knowing that he'd made a difference in both their lives felt amazing. He just wished he could have given even more dogs that fresh start, and he started to wonder if some more good could come from Max and Bruno's stories. Once home, Max settled back into his old life as if he'd never left. Only this time, he was also the responsible big brother to Bruno, showing him the ropes on how good life could be. Josh was still thinking over how he could help more dogs in need. Each time he looked at Max and Bruno, he was overwhelmed with the desire to make a difference. One day, the perfect idea came to him. He had no idea how far he'd get with it, but it was worth a shot. He started a social media campaign, sharing their story and the importance of adopting dogs from shelters rather than buying them from private sellers. Much to his surprise, the campaign quickly gained followers, and soon their story was being shared all over the world. Even some of the biggest shelters and animal charities in the area got on board and began to help out with the campaign. Josh would regularly post updates about Max and Bruno, but he also shared stories of dogs in desperate need of a new home and updates he received from people who had gone on to adopt a shelter dog after seeing his campaign. It was some of the most rewarding and fulfilling work he'd ever done, and it was all thanks to his 2 dogs. People were moved by the tale of Josh and Max's unbreakable bond and how they found each other again. Bruno's story of joining the family also highlighted the importance of adoption, and people regularly commented on what a wonderful bond the 2 dogs had. The campaign helped raise awareness about the countless animals waiting for loving homes and the incredible joy they could bring to those who offered them a new life. It was all that Josh could have ever hoped for. Josh and Max were inseparable once more. Their bond was stronger than ever, but this time they had Bruno too. It was clear that the gentle pit bull was forever grateful for his new family. The man hadn't been sure if going to the shelter had been the right thing to do, but he liked to think that something had compelled him to do so, to reunite with his best friend and find another companion too. He knew he'd been incredibly lucky to get Max back in his life, and he would do everything in his power to ensure both dogs lived their happiest lives and to ensure other dogs had the chance to find their forever homes.